under the flickering lights of the small-town auditorium. The murmurs of the crowd filled the air like restless whispers of fate. The stage curtain trembled slightly as a boy, no older than 15, stood behind it, clutching an old, worn microphone like it was his last hope. His name was Eli, and tonight wasn't just another school talent show. This was the night that could change everything. His mother, Clara, sat in the front row, her hands trembling on her lap. The hospital had given her 2 months, maybe less, if they couldn't pay for the surgery. Eli had tried everything. Odd jobs, singing on the streets, borrowing money that only brought more trouble. Nothing worked, until he heard about the *Sing for Tomorrow talent show, where the grand prize was $50,000 and a national recording deal. He didn't care about fame. He only wanted to save his mom. The host's voice boomed through the hall. Next up, contestant number 19, Eli Carter. Applause scattered across the audience, polite and uncertain. Eli took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. His shoes were scuffed, his shirt too big, but when he looked out into the crowd, he saw only one face, his mother's tearful smile. Then his eyes moved to the judges' table. At the center sat Jonathan Hayes, a world-renowned music producer known for his icy professionalism and brutal honesty. The man had discovered countless stars, but the lines on his face told stories of a life that had burned and broken long ago. He watched Eli with an unreadable expression. Eli adjusted the microphone and began to sing. The first note was soft, trembling. The room hushed instantly. His voice wasn't polished, but it carried a raw, aching beauty, the kind that made hearts still and eyes burn. It was a song he'd written himself, called Come Home, Mama. The lyrics told of a child waiting at the window, watching the stars and praying that his family would be whole again. Each word carried the weight of years spent without a father he'd never known. Jonathan's hand froze mid-note on the scoring sheet. The melody, it was familiar. The way the boy phrased each line, the emotional cadence. It struck something deep inside him. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. When Eli hit the chorus, the spotlight shimmered in his tear-filled eyes. If you hear me now, please come home. I'm still the boy who waits alone. Jonathan's chest tightened. Those were his words. A song he'd written privately 17 years ago, one that had never been released. Only one person had ever heard it. Clara. The pen slipped from his hand. Backstage, the crew exchanged glances. Even the host stood motionless. The crowd was completely silent, except for the haunting sound of the boy's trembling voice echoing through the auditorium. When the final note faded, Eli's shoulders sagged. The silence stretched painfully until a single clap broke through. Then another. Within seconds, the hall erupted into a standing ovation. But Eli didn't notice the applause. He was staring at the man in the center of the judges' table. Jonathan Hayes had risen to his feet, his face pale, eyes wet with disbelief. Where did you learn that song?" he whispered, barely audible through the microphone. Eli frowned, confused. I wrote it. For my mom." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Did your mother's name happen to be Clara Carter?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Clara's face turned ghost white in the front row. Her lips parted, trembling as she whispered his name. "Jonathan." Eli blinked, his mind spinning. "Wait, what did you say? You know my mom?" Jonathan's heart pounded. Memories came rushing back. A small apartment, laughter, a promise he never kept. He had left years ago, driven by ambition, blinded by fame, never knowing Clara was pregnant. The truth hit him like a storm. The boy standing on stage, the one whose voice had pierced his soul, was his son. "I didn't know," Jonathan said softly, his voice breaking. "Eli, I didn't know you existed." Eli's breath hitched. He took a step back, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. My dad left before I was born. My mom said he was gone for good." Jonathan's eyes glistened. She was right. I left, and it's the worst mistake I ever made. The audience watched, spellbound, as silence swallowed the stage again. The host tried to intervene, but Jonathan raised a trembling hand. He turned toward Clara, who now stood, tears streaming down her face. "Clara," he said hoarsely, "why didn't you tell me? "Because you were gone, Jonathan," she cried. "You had everything you ever wanted, the career, the fame. I didn't want to ruin your life. I thought you'd moved on." Jonathan's jaw clenched as he fought the guilt clawing at him. "But I lost my family without even knowing it." Eli's heart thudded painfully. He didn't know what to feel, anger, disbelief, or the strange ache of longing he'd never understood until this moment. The crowd, sensing the weight of what was unfolding, fell into an uneasy silence. Jonathan slowly approached the stage, his eyes never leaving Eli's. "You sang that song to save your mother?" Eli nodded stiffly. "She's sick. The hospital won't operate unless we can pay. This show was my last hope." Jonathan's voice cracked. "Then you've already won, Eli. No matter what the judges decide, you've won." He turned to the panel and said, "This boy's voice is soul, his truth. It's everything music is meant to be. I'll cover his mother's surgery costs, and I'll make sure the world hears him." The hall exploded in applause, but Eli stood frozen, tears spilling down his cheeks. He looked at his mother. She nodded weakly, her hand pressed to her heart. Jonathan reached the stage and extended a trembling hand toward his son. "Please, let me make this right." Eli hesitated, his chest heaving. The crowd held its breath as he took a single step forward, then another. He stared at the man who had been a stranger all his life, yet somehow felt achingly familiar. When their hands finally touched, it wasn't just forgiveness that passed between them. It was recognition. The lights above flickered softly, as if the universe itself was exhaling. But just as the applause roared to life again, a commotion stirred the back of the hall. Voices raised, hurried footsteps, and a doctor in white rushing toward Clara's row. Her face had gone pale. She slumped forward, clutching her chest. "Mom!" Eli screamed, breaking free from Jonathan's hand and sprinting off the stage. The crowd gasped as people stood, trying to see. Jonathan jumped down after him, panic flooding his veins. "Clara, stay with us," he shouted, kneeling beside her as Eli wept, holding her hand. Her breathing was shallow, eyes fluttering weakly. She tried to speak, but her lips only formed one word: "Together," and then her hand went limp in Eli's grasp. "Mom! No, no, please!" Eli's voice cracked, a desperate cry that echoed through the stunned silence of the auditorium. The doctor pushed forward, checking for a pulse while Jonathan held his trembling son, his own face pale with horror. The flashing lights from someone's phone cast chaotic shadows across the stage. The audience, moment ago electrified by joy, now stood frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing tragedy or miracle in the making. "Clear the area," the doctor shouted. "Give her space." Eli clutched his mother's arm tighter, refusing to move. "She can't leave me. Not now. I sang for her. She promised she'd stay." Jonathan pulled him close, his own tears falling freely. "She's not gone, Eli. She's not gone. Do you hear me? She's fighting." The paramedics arrived within minutes, lifting Clara onto a stretcher. Eli tried to follow, but Jonathan held him back, whispering, "We'll go with her. I won't let her face this alone again." The crowd parted in silence as the father and son followed the stretcher out. Cameras flashed, recording every second of the unfolding drama. To the world, it was a story too unbelievable to be real. A boy who sang to save his dying mother, only to discover his father was a judge of his fate. Outside, the night was heavy and cold. The ambulance's red lights bathed their faces. As they climbed in, Eli sat beside his mother, gripping her hand as machines beeped steadily around her. Jonathan sat across from them, his mind a storm of guilt, hope, and disbelief. He remembered the night he had left Clara all those years ago. He was young, ambitious, full of dreams that didn't include love or family. But now, sitting across from the woman who had once been his whole world, and the son he never knew existed, he felt the crushing weight of everything he'd lost. At the hospital, doctors rushed Clara into the emergency room. Jonathan and Eli were left outside, the sterile light washing over their faces as they sat in silence. After what felt like an eternity, Eli finally spoke. "You said you didn't know about me, but how could you not? Didn't you ever wonder?" Jonathan looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. I was selfish, Eli. I wanted the world to remember my name, not realizing I'd erased the only people who truly mattered. By the time I wanted to go back, I didn't know how. Eli stared at the floor, his fists clenched. She did everything alone. Every single thing. She worked nights, skipped meals, just so I could go to school. I sang on the streets to help her. She never said anything bad about you, but I could see it in her eyes. She missed you. Jonathan swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I missed her too. I just didn't deserve to. The silence stretched between them until a nurse appeared. She's stable but weak, she said softly. The next 24 hours are critical. Eli stood instantly. Can I see her? The nurse nodded, leading him inside. Jonathan followed, but hesitated at the door. Inside, Clara lay pale and fragile, tubes connecting her to machines that beeped like the faint rhythm of time itself. Eli took her hand again, whispering, Mom, please wake up. I found him. I found Dad. Jonathan's breath caught at those words. He stepped closer, his voice low and trembling. Clara, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Her eyelids fluttered faintly, as though she heard him through the haze of pain and medication. Eli leaned closer, whispering something only she could hear. Then, for the first time, Jonathan saw them together, not as fragments of his past and present, but as a family. The sight broke something inside him. He walked out quietly, stepping into the hospital hallway, where the glow of vending machines flickered in the dim light. Pulling out his phone, he made a call. Cancel everything, he said to his assistant. Every meeting, every show, every press conference. I'm not leaving this hospital. But, sir, the assistant stammered, the network's expecting. Jonathan hung up before he could finish. For once, he didn't care about the cameras, the headlines, or the deals. All he cared about was behind that hospital door. When he returned to the room, Eli had fallen asleep in the chair beside Clara's bed, his head resting on her arm. Jonathan approached quietly, pulling a blanket over his son's shoulders. He watched him for a long time, his chest tight with strange, painful peace. As dawn crept to the window, painting the sterile walls gold, Jonathan made a silent promise to never walk away again. By morning, the hospital lobby buzzed with news crews and fans. The story had spread like wildfire across social media. Asterisk, boy discovers his father is a judge after singing to save his mom. Asterisk, Jonathan ignored them all. When the doctor finally emerged, Eli jolted awake. She's stable, the doctor said with a smile, but she'll need surgery soon. We've scheduled it for tonight. Eli exhaled shakily. Thank you so much. Jonathan's throat tightened. I'll handle everything, he said firmly. Whatever it costs, it's done. The doctor nodded and left them. For a moment, the air felt lighter, almost hopeful. Eli turned to Jonathan. You really mean it? You'll help her? Jonathan smiled faintly. I'll do more than that. I want to help you too. You have something rare, Eli. That voice is not just talent. It's truth. The world needs to hear it. Eli hesitated. I didn't sing for fame. I sang for her. I know, Jonathan said softly. That's what makes you special. He looked out the window, lost in thought. When I was your age, I thought music was about being heard. But you reminded me it's about being felt. Eli studied him for a long time, uncertain if he could trust a man who had suddenly stepped into his life. But beneath the polished exterior, he saw something fragile, regret maybe, or redemption. Why did you never come back? He asked finally. Jonathan took a deep breath. Because I thought she was better off without me. I was wrong. Before Eli could respond, the door opened and Clara stirred faintly on the bed. Her lips moved weakly, forming his name. Eli, he rushed to her side, gripping her hand. I'm here, Mom. You're okay. You're going to be okay. She blinked slowly, her gaze shifting toward Jonathan. A faint smile touched her lips. You found him. Eli nodded, his eyes wet. Yeah, I did. Jonathan stepped closer, tears threatening again. I'm here, Clara. I'm not leaving this time. She reached out weakly, her fingers brushing his. "You always said music would bring us back together," she whispered faintly. "You were right." Jonathan bowed his head, unable to speak. The machines beeped steadily beside them, each sound a fragile reminder that time was still on their side, at least for now. Outside, the world waited for the next headline, the next performance, the next big story. But inside that quiet hospital room, there was only one thing that mattered: a broken family, slowly finding its way back to one another. Eli sat beside his mother, singing softly, just loud enough for her to hear. His voice trembled, but was filled with warmth, with love, with the kind of strength that comes only from heartbreak and hope. Jonathan listened, every note cutting deeper than the last. And as the melody filled the room, something inside him began to heal, something he hadn't even realized was broken. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like Jonathan Hayes, the famous producer. He just felt like a father. But outside the hospital doors, a sleek black car pulled up. A man in a dark suit stepped out, holding an envelope. His expression was grim, determined. He showed his badge to the receptionist and said, "I'm here for Jonathan Hayes. It's urgent." And inside, unaware of the shadow that just arrived, Eli kept singing softly to his mother as Jonathan stood beside them, his past and its consequences, closing in once again. The man in the dark suit approached the hospital room with slow, deliberate steps, the echo of his shoes blending with the faint hum of the machines inside. Jonathan turned when he heard the knock, his expression cautious but composed. The man handed him the envelope without a word. Jonathan frowned and tore it open. His eyes darted over the papers, the color draining from his face. Eli looked up from where he sat beside his mother. "Dad, what is it?" Jonathan swallowed hard. The word still felt foreign on his tongue. Asterisk, Dad, asterisk. But it carried a warmth that steadied him. "It's from the label," he said finally. "They're pulling my contract. They want to investigate conflict of interest because of last night's show." Eli's brows knit. "You mean they're firing you?" Jonathan gave a faint, almost ironic smile. "Yes," in a very polite, very legal way. Clara stirred weakly on the bed. "Jonathan," her voice was fragile like a breath of wind, "you don't have to lose everything for us." He took her hand gently. "I've already gained everything I ever wanted. Losing the rest doesn't matter anymore." Outside the window, the city was waking up. The soft murmur of cars, the pink wash of dawn over the skyline. Inside, the quiet was sacred. For the first time in years, Jonathan didn't feel hollow. He didn't feel like a man running from the ghosts of what he'd left behind. When the door closed behind the suited man, Eli turned toward him, his eyes full of questions. "So what happens now?" Jonathan exhaled, sinking into the chair beside him. "Now, we start over. But this time, together." He smiled faintly, though a hint of uncertainty lingered. "It won't be easy. The world will talk, the press will dig, but we'll face it." Eli's gaze softened. "As long as Mom gets better, that's all I care about." Jonathan looked at Clara, pale but peaceful, and nodded. "She will. I promise." The surgery was scheduled for that evening. As the hours passed, Jonathan made arrangements, signing documents, transferring payments, doing everything he could to ensure no obstacle stood in the way. He moved like a man on a mission, but every few minutes his eyes would drift back to Clara's face, just to make sure she was still breathing steadily. Eli never left her side. He talked softly to her about everything. School, the nights he'd sung on street corners, the strangers who dropped coins because they felt something. And he told her about last night, how the song, their song, had changed everything. When the doctors finally wheeled her toward the operating room, Eli held her hand until they wouldn't let him follow. "I'll be right here," he whispered. "I'll sing for you again when you wake up." She managed a weak smile before the doors closed behind her. Then came the waiting. Hours stretched like eternity. Eli sat in the corner, his head in his hands, while Jonathan paced the corridor, his nerves taut. Every time a nurse walked by, his heart leaped. Finally, the surgeon emerged, removing his mask. "The operation was successful," he said with a smile. "She's in recovery now. She'll need rest, but she's going to make it. Eli let out a sob of relief and hugged Jonathan tightly. For a moment, Jonathan froze. Then his arms closed around his son, strong and certain. They went to see her together. Clara looked peaceful, color returning slowly to her cheeks. When her eyes fluttered open, Eli was already holding her hand. "You did it," she whispered, smiling faintly. "My brave boy." He shook his head, tears shining. "We did it, Mom. All of us." Jonathan sat beside her bed, silent for a long moment, then said softly, "Clara, there's something I want to tell you both." Eli looked up curious. Jonathan's eyes glistened as he spoke. "When I left all those years ago, I told myself I'd return once I made something of myself. I thought success would fill the emptiness I felt inside. But the more I gained, the emptier it got. Fame, money, the applause, it all meant nothing when the lights went out. I didn't realize until last night that the only music that ever mattered was the kind that comes from love." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You always had that music, Jonathan. You just forgot how to listen." He nodded, his voice rough. "Then let me listen again. Let me make it right this time." Eli reached for his father's hand, small but strong. Then we started a new song. Together. Jonathan smiled, a real, unguarded smile that seemed to wash years off his face. Over the next few weeks, Clara recovered steadily. Jonathan stayed by her side through it all. The world outside buzzed with headlines, asterisk, the secret father behind the talent show scandal, asterisk. But he didn't care. He turned down every interview, every chance to reclaim his fame. Instead, he poured his time into Eli's music. Under his father's quiet guidance, Eli began recording songs about hope lost and love that refused to die. Each lyric carried a piece of their story, and when the first song went online, it spread like wildfire. The title was simple, asterisk for you, Mom. Asterisk. Millions listened. Thousands wrote messages saying it gave them hope, that it made them call someone they'd lost touch with, that it healed something in them. And when the world finally realized that the song wasn't about celebrity, but about forgiveness, it became something far greater than fame. One afternoon, Jonathan walked into the small studio where Eli was recording. The boy stood by the microphone, eyes closed, singing another song he'd written. Jonathan watched quietly, pride glowing in his eyes. When Eli finished, he turned and smiled. "You think she'll like it?" Jonathan chuckled. "She'll love it, and so will everyone else." Eli tilted his head. "You really think so?" Jonathan nodded. "I know so, because you're singing the truth, and the truth always finds a way to be heard." They shared a look, one of understanding, of everything unspoken. The bond between them, once broken, was now unshakable. Later that evening, they returned to the hospital to visit Clara. She was sitting up, weak but smiling. On her bedside table sat a small radio, playing For You, Mom. Her eyes shone as she listened. "That voice," she whispered. "That's my boy." Jonathan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smiling softly. "Our boy." Eli sat beside her, resting his head on her shoulder. For a while, no one spoke. The song filled the room like sunlight. Then Jonathan stepped forward and pulled a small envelope from his jacket. "There's something else," he said. "The hospital bills are paid. But I also bought something for you both. A house. By the lake. Somewhere quiet where you can rest and Eli can sing without worrying who's listening." Clara's eyes widened. "Jonathan, you didn't have to." "I did," he said simply. "Because home isn't about where you live. It's about who you live for." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then I guess we're finally home." Tears welled in Eli's eyes as he whispered, "Can we all live there? Together?" Jonathan smiled. "If your mother will let me." Clara laughed softly, the sound warm and alive. "You've got a lot of years to make up for, Jonathan Hayes. But I think we can start." He nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all I want." The weeks turned into months. The lake house became a haven, a place of healing, of laughter, of second chances. Mornings were filled with the sound of Eli's guitar drifting over the water, and evenings with quiet talks under the stars. One night, As fireflies danced outside the porch, Eli looked up at the sky and said, "You know, I used to wish I had a father. I used to imagine what he'd be like. I never thought he'd be you." Jonathan turned toward him, surprised. "And now that he is?" Eli grinned. "Now I can't imagine him being anyone else." Jonathan smiled, his chest tight with gratitude. "You saved me, Eli. You and your mother, you both did." Eli shook his head. "No, Dad. You saved us. You just took the long way home." Jonathan laughed quietly, the sound filled with peace. He looked toward Clara, who was sitting by the window, the soft glow of the moon touching her hair. And for the first time in decades, everything felt right. The music that had once divided them had now bound them together. That night, as Eli sang one last song before bed, a song he'd written just for the two of them, Jonathan closed his eyes and listened. Each note seemed to tell the story of their journey. The pain, the forgiveness, the reunion that fate had hidden in plain sight. When the final chord faded into the night, Jonathan whispered, "That's the sound of forever." The world would remember the scandal, the show, the headlines. But for them, it wasn't about any of that. It was about a boy who sang to save his mother, and in doing so, found his father, his family, and a new beginning that no fame or fortune could ever match. And somewhere in the quiet hush of the night, the stars above seemed to echo the same melody, the song of a home once lost, now found again.